Hi, I'm Claudia Rinaldi, and I'm here at Fuller Middle School to talk about multi-tier systems of support for our multilingual learners. So this is one of 3 workshops that I'll be doing with the district to prepare our educators to be able to serve the students who are multilinguals and multilinguals with disabilities. There'll be some ideas that I'll share throughout the slides and the conversation, ultimately the idea is to improve our multi-tier system of support and think about cultural and linguistically responsive practices as part of the process. I hope you enjoy the lecture.
So I'm really excited that we all are going today to engage in deepening our skills and expertise in those areas so that we can do better for our students in Framingham. So without further ado, Dr. Claudia Rinaldi.
Thank you, Natalia. I have to hook this up, so give me a second. But I am really excited to be here. Like Natalia said, we met so many years ago, and we continue to interact in the field a lot through MATSL. So when the conference is coming up, you should come. It's a really great conference and great topics to help our multilingual learners with and without disabilities. I'm really excited to be here. What Natalia didn't say was I started my career as a teacher myself, but before that, I was actually an English learner myself. So I came to the US when I was 10. Of course, I don't have an accent, right? So my children say I don't have an accent, so I go by their evaluation of me. But obviously, a lot of people think I have an accent, and when I get nervous, I do forget my English, so I always say that. But I came when I was 10, and I did not have any English at all. And I came to Miami, Florida, and I didn't have a really sad story. I just hopped on a plane. My mom had an apartment in Miami Beach, and we just decided to move after my parents divorced. So that was kind of my first experience with English was coming here. I went to a Catholic school in Miami Beach. And the first year, I didn't really say one word. And I couldn't go to the bathroom. I couldn't talk to anybody. Come to find out in April, all my teachers were Cuban, all spoke Spanish, and all my peers also spoke Spanish, but nobody spoke Spanish to me, and there were no ESL services in Catholic schools. So it was a really tough year, but I do remember one thing from it, because I think you try to block those experiences that are really tough, and that was the word crush. Anybody have any idea why the word crush was really critical as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 5th grader? Yeah, so I spent, I think, the whole year trying to decipher crush is something they use because you like, a boy, but there's a drink that says crush, and then there is the word crash, and they all sound the same to me in the untrained ear. And that's all I remember about 5th grade. So we can all go home now. I was okay. I ended up all right. It just made me realize that this is a passion of mine, was to make sure that kids did not have the experience, one, of not getting support services around learning a new language. But the other part that happened was I really lost my Spanish. So I am a Spanish speaker. I could talk a lot in Spanish, interpersonal language Spanish. The academic Spanish language has taken me a really long time to build because we don't, use it as often. And so again, that gives you an experience of what you know in one language doesn't really match in the other one necessarily, even though some of the words will. But there is a difference with what the kids bring when we call about a foundation of a fund of knowledge, right? That it comes with certain vocabulary in one language and certain vocabulary in another language. We don't have equal vocabularies on both languages. So having experienced that, it's really what's driven my passion to kind of do that. And the last part of why I got into special education was because I repeated 3rd grade as well in Colombia. And I repeated because I was doing really poorly in reading in Spanish. And so the school decided with my mom to make me repeat 3rd grade. And I also remember the day that I cracked the code. So there is something as cracking the code. Hopefully it would happen to everybody, but sometimes it does not for some students with disabilities. But I do remember I was in the car and I'm driving and I saw all these poster board, signs in the street. And suddenly, I don't know why, everything clicked and I was able to read them. And then I just couldn't stop reading everything that was in front of me. And then since then, I've been able to read just fine, right? So again, it kind of developed a passion for why is it that our students struggle. And in particular, I've always been passionate about the students right on the cusp, like what makes teachers refer students to special education, particularly our multilingual students, okay? So I just wanted to give you a background. I was a teacher for 5 years before I left the classroom in general education elementary and in special education, also elementary ages. I also should tell you that when I came from Colombia, I was in 3rd grade there, but I was gonna turn 11 when school started here. And the school said to my mom that I couldn't go into 4th grade because I would be too old. So they put me in 5th grade, no English, remember that? But my first year teaching, guess what grade I taught? 4th grade, so I never skipped it. So I'm okay. I made 4th grade, and I really learned it because I had to teach it. So just kind of interesting facts. So today, Natalia asked me to come and speak to you about your multi-tier system of support and how to make it better or more accessible for your multilingual learners. So I kind of structured the session around roadblocks because you're already doing the MTSS models. I looked at the middle school manual, and I looked at some of your information on the website, and I talked to Natalia, so I knew that you were already in process. And I just want to commend you for that because not all districts are actually doing it, and certainly not at the middle school level. So give yourselves a hand, please, even if you're not in middle school. And you've developed some really great tools. But what research tells us is there are very particular roadblocks that we're seeing come up again and again. So I'll address those with some opportunities for learning, okay? Before we start, what I wanted to kind of start with was just a short, silly video. But what I love about this video has nothing to do with education other than I want to set the tone for today, because a lot of times you come and you're open to learning, but then you go back to your teams, just like I do, and you're like, well, this is too hard, or there's simple solutions and we don't do them. So whatever solution you get from me today that you might like or that you might feel is helpful, I want you to make it happen tomorrow, okay, maybe in a week, okay? So I wanted to start with the second video, and it's just under 2 minutes, okay? So enjoy it. If you've seen it, don't give it away.
No. Sorry. Somebody. Hello. There are 2 people stuck on an escalator, and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something?
So what do you think? Any thoughts about that?
I think that's the way a lot of people feel sometimes. Help!
Yeah.
Help!
And some solutions are not rocket science. Some solutions are really just doing them, and they're hard to do, but they're just about doing them, right? Same thing with everything in life, like dieting or lowering your sugar intake for diabetes or whatever it is. It's just you have to do it. So anyway, I really enjoyed the video because it kind of sets us on the frame of mind that we just kind of need to move people. So your job is to move people, right? That's what you do every day. As a coach, as an administrator, you move people. So as we go through today, think about what idea you get. Hopefully I'll simulate some ideas. If I don't, please don't tell me because I'll feel really bad the rest of the day. No, feel free to ask me for more ideas and take it and kind of run with it, okay? Don't give up because there are many things that we could do today. Even if they're easy but hard to implement, there are things we could do today. You could stimulate somebody to think about an idea, to reflect on a practice, to reflect on a meeting. You could pilot with one teacher. You could start a conversation. You could share a slide. You could share a link, okay? So think about those things that you want to take forward. Okay, so I wanted to also begin by showing you the problem that we have. So the problem that we have right now is that number keeps going up, okay? Any area of disability occurs in any population at the same rates, or prevalence, we call it, or incidence. However, from 2012 to 2020, we're not even updated numbers, but this is the latest from the Department of Education, we've seen a continual growth of English learners who are identified with disabilities. But if the stance is that the incidence is the same, regardless of background or language or who the child is, we're over-identifying, okay? So when we think about that, the first thought that I want you to think about is, did we talk enough about the language of the child, the native language of the child? I just sat in a couple meetings at a different district yesterday, transition meetings to middle school, and they were talking about bilingual students, and language did not come up. In another one, the language came up as a number. That's it. But if you're a bilingual student, think of me. I sat there 5th grade the entire year. Somebody, as I transitioned to middle school, could have put me in a self-contained classroom for students with significant cognitive delays because I didn't really speak that year. I don't know what kept me out of special education, but I thank every one of those educators, right? So one idea that you could take home today is, in every meeting that you sit, your charge is to say, is this a second language learner? What can he do or what can she do? Open up your WIDA can-do indicators or ask your ESL person to do that and look at what they can do. We could do a lot of things. I just didn't have the opportunity to show them, okay? The other part, the next part is really how is this playing out in your district? What does your district data tell you about this unique population? So here's the second charge I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you lots of charges. So if somebody's taking good notes, maybe they could summarize at the end. The second charge is know your data. So when I asked Natalia for the data, she gave it to me literally within 10 minutes. Know your data, meaning how many students are native language speakers of another language other than English? What is their English level? So how many of each level do you have? How many are dually identified with special education needs? And what areas of special education? What are those little groups looking like? Okay, so here are just some questions to kind of help you kind of think about that. And I just want you to think about these statements. There are 3.5 more times to be placed in special education when the teachers refer them. 3.5 more times. In some districts we've looked at over the last 10 years, it's been 7 times more likely. So knowing that number for your district would also be really good to keep us in check. You could sit in a meeting and say, oh, in our district, they're twice as likely for English learners to be identified for special education. So we just want to make sure we start this meeting thinking about that and making sure that we are referring for the right reasons. Do we have a comprehensive picture of the child? Okay? Most of the time, they're identified with speech and language disorders or specific learning disabilities, and there's nothing specific about learning disabilities. It's just a learning disability, and in many areas, right? And then the Department of Justice did actually publish that saying in one of their policy papers that we tend to identify or evaluate students overwhelmingly in English. Now, Framingham is a very different place. You guys are doing a lot of really great things. But ask that question. Because if you have a student who is an English level 3, they're more likely to be tested in English only. Because the kid can speak. He can interact in class. He could be in the playground succeedingly having tons of friends. But I could tell you that for the first 6 years of me learning English, the biggest criticism I got from all my teachers was, you have to learn vocabulary because everything for you is this thing and that other thing, and thing. Everything was a thing because that works for everything, right? But I was able to communicate. I could explain. So again, thinking about when we refer those students for either Tier 2 interventions or pre-referral or special education, thinking about their English level, which is why knowing those groups is really key. So whatever Tier 2 intervention you're thinking about for students that are level 3 should be different than the intervention for students who are English levels 5 or English level 1. They need different things, different exposure, right? It seems basic. I said it was no rocket science. I'm not going to tell you anything today that it's rocket science. I'm just reminding us of things that we tend to rush through because of time. Okay. So here are the current roadblocks that we see. And one is that educators do not know their role in the MTSS model in the school or assume they're not part of it. So again, charge number 3, I think we're on, is everyone in your building involved in the MTSS model? Everyone. Everyone. All hands on deck. Everybody should have a job in MTSS. They're either teaching Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, evaluating students with the benchmarkings or diagnostic assessments or observations, and we'll talk about that later. But everyone should be involved in doing some aspect of the model. Okay. 2 is educators have conflicting information about when and how to support multilingual learners. I think you probably figured this one out. ESL is part of every tier. But certainly, if the student is taken out for Tier 2, so that's charge number 4? Charge number 4. Ensure that the Tier 2 intervention times that you have are not ESL, because that's part of Tier 1. Their ESL support should be Tier 1. Tier 2 should be additional and strategic for them, right? So again, you may know it, but the teacher in 5th grade may just say, oh, well, that's a great time for them to go to the ESL teacher. So as administrators and coaches that you are, you could say, okay, we're just going to review that the students are getting the services that they need in the way that they need to get it. So let's review. All ESL students are getting ESL support in this way. Yes. Tier 2, those needing Tier 2 interventions are getting additional. Yes. Is that in consultation with the ESL teachers? That's charge number 5. Are those interventions in consultation or in delivery by the ESL teacher? Okay? So oftentimes in schools, what we see in this roadblock is that Tier 2 is a package curriculum that they get. Let's say, I don't know, I'm just going to throw one for sake of thinking. Wilson Learning, although that's really more of special ed. But let's say we're going to take out these kids and give them LLI. That's a better one, right? LLI is one that is very common in elementary schools. So everybody who needs Tier 2 intervention gets LLI. Well, research tells us that English learners, or multilingual learners, need a focus on vocabulary instruction. Remember my example of I named everything a thing? That's why they need vocabulary instruction. They need words. So if we give them LLI, which is an evidence-based strategy program, they're going to have a little bit of vocabulary. But the focus is not going to be vocabulary. So in consultation with the ESL teacher, you would know that we need to focus on vocabulary, and you might say, when starting each of those sessions, can you preview the vocabulary ahead of time, have it printed for the students, and have them the ability to practice it as you go through the intervention. That's what's additional and different for the kids, okay? You could also say, for this particular of English learners who are level 3s, we're gonna do a vocabulary-only intervention, and then we're gonna monitor progress every 6 weeks and see what the outcome for that is, okay? So we don't have to do kind of they call it a standard protocol, meaning everybody gets the same intervention. It could be tailored for the number of students. Of course, that goes then to resources in the building, personnel, et cetera, but something to think about. Third roadblock is educators inadvertently receive the message to wait until multilingual learners speak English before referring them for a special education evaluation. So sometimes they're under-identified and sometimes they're over-identified, right? And just to clarify, according to the law, we should, if there is any suspect of a disability, the child can be evaluated at any point. If the parent comes to you, you can't say, no, I'm sorry, we're going to put them through the MTSS model first. No, you have to evaluate. You have to follow through, okay? MTSS was never developed to be a roadblock for special education evaluation. Okay, I'll repeat that. MTSS was never a roadblock for special education evaluation. It was meant to be as a regular education intervention option for kids who needed it, and that it was fluid, meaning you would get 2 cycles of 6 weeks or 3 cycles, and the kids move in and out with fluidity around that intervention. Now, in some schools, the kids stay in the intervention the entire time because we're not progress monitoring. So what ends up happening is we give somebody LLI, let's say, for example. They have it for how many weeks in the school year? 36, right? We didn't progress monitor, and it didn't work for them. And so we wasted a year in which the students are falling further behind. So the fluidity comes with progress monitoring, and I'll talk a little bit about that, okay? And that takes us to the 4th problem, which is that we don't know how to do this. The other aspect of MTSS that we need to know is that really the challenge happens first in Tier 1. And I don't know how many of you pushed into Tier 1. Can I get a show of hands, Tier 1? Okay, so there's a good number of you. So what we know is that Tier 1, it's really not accessible to our students most often, right? Now we have the SCI training, and all the student teachers are SCI endorsed, and they do have really good strategies. But how do we monitor that the teachers are actually doing it? That's probably what some of you who raised your hand do, is ensure that they're doing that, right? And you are better experts than I am in telling me how that's happened. Would anybody like to share some observations from the field? Go ahead.
I'm the ELT coach at Pyro. One thing, and as you, English is second language, so I went through the process of this thing, communicate, passing the test. But long story short, one thing I see is the assumption that one differentiation of scaffolding
Yes.
fits all the levels.
She gets $1 million today.
I could use it.
I could use that too. Yeah, so one typical aspect of the teachers say, oh, well, I'll have a word bank. That should do it.
I have a sentence.
Boom, right? So, charge number 5 is start giving them more strategies that they need to implement to kind of create more access to the regular curriculum. And I have a slide in a little bit that will give you some better questions. Yes, Natalia has it and she'll sell it. Okay, so the question is, not only are we doing those strategies, but is the curriculum culturally and linguistically, in the new term, sustaining, which I really like sustaining, because I didn't sustain mine, right? Sustaining for the students. So if I have you all read here a contract to buy a new home, raise your hand how many of you understand the legalese of that contract. Raise your hand. Look around. Look at your experts in the room. 0. 0, right? Imagine that when the kids get the next chapter of literacy or science and social studies, for them is legalese because they have they may not have any connection to that content. Good example is the 3 branches of government of the United States. They're like, I don't know. First of all, I don't know anything about government. Okay. So you're giving them some new information, kind of like what you feel when you're signing those papers when you buy a home and you're like, I'm signing my life away. I hope I'm not going to end up in trouble by signing or buying a car or whatever, right? You're like, I always say, I'm signing my life away. I hope it works, right? So the idea is to think about in ways that the access can also be connected to the students' experiences, to their funds of knowledge. Maybe you could compare it to that in their country. Maybe you could have a pre-lecture about what government is. I don't know. Whatever we do as teachers every day to access the curriculum, removing barriers to it. The other aspect that we miss in Tier 1 is something called oracy. And oracy, we'll look at a definition in a minute, but it's basically the ability to use that interpersonal language that we have for an academic purpose. That's what I've been trying to grow since I became a professional. And I'll tell you another tangent. So when I was asked to do my first presentation in Spanish, I'm like, sure, I'll do it, no big deal. I had like 25 preschool teachers. I was in Miami during my doctoral studies, and I was with another colleague, and I stood up and I'm like, no words came out. I had no academic vocabulary in my field because everything I was reading was in English. I felt like a complete idiot, right? I'm like, so I turned to my peer and I'm like, how do you say this in Spanish? How do you say that in Spanish? And that is my native language, right? So when we think about oracy, it's really important that we don't assume that because they're reading it, they're able to use the academic language, but that we really give them the oral practice to use that academic language with peers in the classroom. So as administrators and coaches that you are, think about how much time the teacher spends in front of the students, teaching at the students like I'm doing today. So I'm a bad example today, right? Because if I don't have you practice what you learn, it's hard to know it and remember it and use it. So Tier 1 could easily be improved if we look at whether the curriculum is culturally and linguistically sustaining, and if there's opportunity for oracy practice within the structure of each lesson. So the kids should always be talking about the academic content. So if you walk in as a coach and there's not talking, you say, should we consider maybe adding, I always say, why don't you start with one small group? You could send one small group to practice some kind of activity, Because for teachers, it's hard for them to put them into groups or pairs, one all at the same time, when that's not part of the way that they teach, right? So one way to start is in little opportunities. So what if you had 2 pairs go to the end and have this particular activity? And then as they feel more comfortable, then you could then move on to a whole class. And then have a discussion of how much time should be part of that practice that the students are doing with the curriculum, okay? I also put this triangle here, which is not your MTSS triangle, so I wanted kudos for that, because you're gonna see the MTSS triangle. And you know, what's the top of the triangle? Can anyone read? Lecture. So, God, you're only gonna keep 5% of what I said, which is why I'm telling them to write, we're number 5, right? Number 5? I picked her as my note taker, 6, okay. Both of you can check with each other, okay? Because if we talk at the kids, they only retain 5%. I'm sure you've all seen this, right? Do you remember seeing that when you were in college? I think we all saw that in college. But what's the biggest bang for your buck here? Oh, and I love to use idioms, and they're always wrong, so just go with it. Teaching others. If you teach others, you retain 90%. That's where the peer interaction around using oracy goes into. If they're talking about the academics in structured ways, they will remember it. Remember I told you my story of 5th grade? I don't remember a thing they taught me. Just the word crush, because it was something I was interested in. I liked the boy, and I had to say it to somebody. So the aspects in red are really more what the purpose of the motto is. And the purpose, again, is not to keep kids out of special education. It's really to ensure that there's no disproportionality, that there is progress monitoring so we don't keep interventions a whole year that don't work for particular kids. And it also ensures that we are always checking to see that those interventions are addressing the needs of your population, your multilingual learners. That may be new. How do we ensure that, right? Okay. And it's a preventive model, okay, so. So here are the roadblocks that I kind of mentioned. So one is at the core, so roadblock is core. And in this core, Framingham is already ahead of the game because you have a lot of bilingual programs already happening. So your whole system, as a system, you believe in bilingualism. Even if you're not a dual language school, you believe in bilingualism. So I bet if I walked into any classroom here, I would see teachers supporting native language. Okay? But we also could do universal design for learning. I don't know where you are in that part of the process, and I'll talk just a little bit about it. But universal design is about removing barriers. So when you're thinking about lesson plans or what you're gonna teach, is assuming you are creating barriers. Okay, so my barrier today is that I am lecturing. That is a barrier. So I spent like 3 hours yesterday trying to come up for an activity for you. Okay? And Natalia has the link. So I am gonna put you to work, I promise. And I am gonna give you an opportunity to kind of talk to each other in a second, okay? And then, so the cultural and linguistically diverse practices with oracy, that kind of goes together, universal design, all our aspects we need to be continuing to infuse into tier one. Tier one, just don't give up. Don't get stuck in that escalator. Don't give up, okay? Please. Think of the video when you feel like, oh my God, these teachers are really not doing this. They don't get it. They have to get it at some point. Everybody has a different learning trajectory, so just accept it, but don't give up. Okay. Number 3 is the progress monitoring. Number 4 is one that I didn't talk about yet, but that is, how do we self-assess that we are doing what we said we were gonna do? Fidelity of implementation, right? And that's where I'm gonna put you to work. So you'll see that in a little bit. Okay, so here you are. So we did a little cheat sheet. Natalia gave it to you, so you're not gonna go back, but you should go back for your own particular school and get this breakdown. So what do you see here? Talk to the person next to you and tell them what you see in this chart. This is 2024 data. Okay, what do you notice? What was the topic of your conversations?
That the 1 to 1.9 is a very large percentage. That you're 25% of those students identified.
So are you a little surprised by it? Okay, good. That's why I like data, because you get surprised. Because somehow in our mind we have this beautiful view, like they're all equally divided into the 5, or into 6 levels, right? Okay.
Most newly identified students are falling in the 3.9 proficiency level or lower.
Yep. So most of them.
Failure, their ESL trajectory is still going up.
Yep. So they're talking. They are talking, I promise. They are interacting with their peers. So is it that they can move up? Or is it that we're assuming that they could speak and we don't assess them correctly in their native language? I don't know. That's something for you to explore, get curious about. Okay, what else? One more observation. Oh, so shy. You're ESL people, come on. I have good wait time. Somebody eventually will raise their hand. You were overwhelmed by the information. So what other observation did you make? Okay, I'm going to let you think about that, and there's a hand raised right here. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I was actually just, but it's a lot of students.
It's a lot of students. I agree with you.
And that brings me back to your point of like, why? Like, what is it about the way we're assessing and identifying students that is leading to this?
So one question to follow up your observation is, are they moving every year? Because this is only 1 year data. So my question at the bottom was really unfair because I didn't ask Natalia for it. So
I did the data. I shared it with you. I did the chart of years in U.S. versus proficiency level.
okay.
You can take a look at that chart as well. I shared the link.
So take a look, because in every district I've been to, there are some students that actually regress. Not that they're stopped learning English. The test gets harder every year, right? But then their scores regress. Are we okay with that? You know, part may be the test itself, the getting the child to sit as they get older in the test is a pain. They don't want to do it. They don't care. They're being teenagers. Yes, I have 2 of those at home, you know. But keeping track of our data is really critical because sometimes we call them long-term Ls, right? Or long-term MLs. And we think they can't learn. And I can assure you their English is improving. So how do we capture that? How do we engage them in capturing what they really can do? And, you know, like there was a student I followed in a particular district nearby, and in 3rd grade, when he was referred to special education for behavior, his overall score was a 5.1. He had a 6 in one of the 4 areas. Everything else was like 5 to 6. Middle school, 7th grade, he was a 2.1. 2.1. I'm like, what the heck happened? Nobody had thought, and you know, those things again happen for the reasons I told you. I think in this particular case, the kid didn't want to take the test. He doesn't care, right? But the point is, we're not really getting good scores on the kids if they are not engaged in knowing the importance of it either, right? So, you know, getting curious about our data is really critical. I want you to be curious. So this is the overall district data, but I want you to go back and see it by school, in the school or schools that you work at. Monitor your kids. You're not going to have 668, thank God. That's Natalia's job, right? Or in the case of Boston Public Schools, when we first helped them get to that number of dually identified students, just so you could feel better. There were 3,006. There's 4,200 now. Okay? Okay. This was another chart that Natalia gave me, so I take no credit for these. She did it all. So knowing that, you could talk to her anytime and be like, hey, can you create that little chart for me? So this is a scatter plot. It looks at years in the US with overall levels of English development at the bottom. And my questions was, how can you use this information to plan for instruction, intervention, scheduling, hiring, monitoring progress, all the aspects of the model? What do you know about the growth of regression? And, what can it tell you about what interventions work and don't work? So that's a lot of questions, right? But when you look at the scatter plot, the more concentrated the dots, right, the more students that are there. So one quick observation about this data. What do you think? There's a lot of kids here, and they have anywhere between 0 years, so newcomers, to 8 years or so of being in the country. Isn't that interesting? And they're at a level 1.9. Different experiences, right? I try to raise my kids bilingually, so at home, my husband only speaks English, and I obviously speak Spanish, so we did this, I would speak to them in Spanish. And to be fair, like when you speak to the husband in English, it's really not 50-50, it's really like 25-75 English, right? But I could tell you my kids have a lot of receptive or listening vocabulary in Spanish. They also went to do a language school in Boston. So, they should be better at it. But, the influence of English is tremendous. Meaning, Meaning that for this kid, they're just getting the influx of English. But this kid, these kids right here, more than 3 years, why are they stuck there? Because everything around them is in English. All the TV, YouTube videos, TikTok, et cetera, right? Movies. So again, getting curious about your data is something that I want you to leave as a 6 or 7? 7. Get curious about your data. We're going to send the list out, Natalia? Let's send the list out. Okay. So what we know, again, is what I told you. There's low fidelity of core. So teachers go in and teach, and we're still teaching to the mass. I'm teaching to the mass right now, so I'm really not a good example right now. But I do have a skewed distribution. You're all working as coaches, so you probably all have ELD backgrounds for the most part. There is information that tells us that there's not really oracy happening in the classrooms. Okay? Raise your hand if you agree with that statement. Look around, please. Okay? So that's one thing you could change right away. Okay. The other thing that MTSS is failing us is we're all still waiting until after benchmark to know which are the students that need intervention. So we need you to change the perspective of teachers that come in and say, who is your 20% or 25% of students, doesn't have to be just multilingual learners, who is the 20-25% of students that are gonna need a second dose, your tier 2. Your job in the first week of school is to find that list of students, okay? Turn to the person next to you and tell them, practice how you would say that to a teacher right now. Go ahead, 20 seconds. How would you say that to a teacher? No, you're repeating verbatim. You're cheating. But it's a good one, How do you think that will go?
I need
Yeah. Can you work with me to find that 20? That, I like that one. That's a great one. Yeah. Okay, great. So we have a winner here. So if you come in as the coach or administrator or whatever your role is and say, we know that 25% of the kids automatically day one are going to need something additional. Can you work with me to identify them? This was your call. Can you work with me to identify them? The benchmark will support our finding. It's kind of like, you know, if you eat candy and you have diabetes, it's going to spike up your sugar, right? So if you have that little metric thing that people put now on their arms, you know, you're less likely to eat that sugar in the morning and make a better choice because you know it's going to come up. So if we know who are the kids, we're automatically finding them, then we are probably better at structuring our lessons in Tier 1 to ensure that we're doing a variety of ways to help them access the curriculum. Just the intentionality of it makes us better. Okay? Think of emotional eating versus intentional eating. Emotional eating, you're frustrated one day, you're tired, and you just open the refrigerator and you're like, I'm gonna have a piece of cake. Just today, right? But if you're intentional and you've been working on a diet and you've lost 20 pounds and you're like super excited about it and you're like, I'm so emotional today, and you open the fridge and you're like, oh, I want that cake so bad, but I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it because it's gonna blow up the whole thing that I'm trying to do. So you're more intentional about your choices. So how about we help them to think about who are those kids and what would they need differently? So identify them and what do you think they need different? Okay? So as I'm saying that, I'm thinking like, who are my 25% here? Who are you? Who are you? I'm trying to think about it, okay? And then the next question is, let's think about how the model is different, right? That was the question Natalia had for me. How is the MTSS model different for English learners? So here are a couple things to think. The model for for monolingual English students is the language of the school is the same as the language of the family. So they come in, whatever they hear in school, automatic, they get access to it, they know what the teacher's talking about, they're learning, they're accessing. For the other students who are multilingual learners, the language of the school is different from the language of the family. So they're making a transition every day, back and forth, trying to translate in some cases, in other cases trying to access the vocabulary they have. So it's different for them. So if it's different, do they need a different intervention? That's my question, right? Okay, the students access academic learning through their language they already know. For our students, the students need to learn English as a new language to access the grade level academics. That means that L1 must be supported through dual language or bilingual programming that goes even beyond ESL support to transfer those skills. So your work is critical in this aspect of the model. Don't let them push you aside. Don't let them not do your suggestions or your goals. You know, really take the job that you do and say, this is really critical. This is critical. We need to do it. If you can't do it like this, tell me how I can help you to do it. Who are your 25% of the teachers that you work with that need that second dose? Think about it that way, okay? So think about that for a second. 10 seconds to think about all the teachers you work with and who are the ones that need extra help. I bet you pinpointed them already. Yes? Okay. Good. So think about what would be their Tier 2 intervention, in a way. Okay. Third area, students are learning to read through a language that they already know. So reading is language-based. But for our students, they're expected to learn how to read in a new language. And if the culturally responsive reading instruction and multicultural literature is not used, then they really have a much harder time accessing it. And so we have to focus on the funds of knowledge and vocabulary, right? So again, the question is, can the intervention be the same? It has to look different. Okay? Okay. So, this is exactly what we're talking about. So language supports must be provided across all tiers. ESL is part of tier 1. Everything should be designed with consultation with the ESL teacher. You know, all these things you already know. Okay. We don't always have to do a package curriculum. The package curriculum is made for the majority population. Then they add, oh, if you have an English learner, you could try this, right? Yeah, the quarter page, or if we're lucky, maybe more than a paragraph, right? So you could use strategy instruction, and there are various strategies that are available, like peer-mediated learning, and we'll talk about that in other sessions, and others that really help to go beyond just the package program. Okay? I think sometimes as teachers we forget the professionalism that we developed to say, yes, LLI is really good for some students, but for my students, it really needs to look different. And then you get the pushback like, well, you have to do the program with fidelity. And you're like, yes, I have to do it with fidelity for the majority student or the English dominant student. But for our students, you need to push back and say, for our students, it needs to look different. Okay? Because the curriculum developers are not in classrooms, and curriculum developers don't have the experience of all the variety of students that we saw in our chart. Okay? And it must always, always include vocabulary. Okay? So here's one resource. So this is number 8, Natalia. Okay? And is to think about culturally responsive, sustaining practices by breaking it down into all these areas. One is the philosophy the teacher has. That's a big deal. But engage in a conversation with them about that. What's your philosophy on culturally responsive practices? They may say, I don't really know what it is. I read it and I'm like, sure, I like that. I don't disagree with it, but I don't really know what it is, right? So engage with them to know their philosophy. Or you may get a surprise conversation where they're like, well, they really need to learn English only. I don't know. Do we engage enough in those conversations to know the philosophy, right? Is the learning environment culturally and linguistically responsive? So when you go into the classrooms, do you see your children represented in those walls? Do you see the literature in the classroom represented of their backgrounds? Do you have multilingual books available? You know, what makes you go in and say, all these cultures are represented in that classroom? Can you help teachers think about that? That's what being culturally and linguistically sustaining pedagogy is thinking about it in those areas. The curriculum, and I'll give you, there's a link below there, but I'll show you another picture in a minute, is the curriculum culturally and linguistically sustaining. That's also a little bit more difficult because the district's already purchased this, right? So you're kind of a little bit stuck. But what can you supplement with? Okay, that could be the question there. Is the teaching culturally and linguistically responsive? And is the assessment culturally and linguistically responsive? So I've sat in a university meeting about a month ago, and we were talking about students. We've gotten a huge increase of students on the spectrum in college. Very smart, very capable. They fall on their faces socially. They can't sit in our classrooms. So we have to change the way we teach, right? And I still had in this meeting 2 people who raised their hand and they're like, well, that's not fair to the other kids. That mentality is still around. I think it will increase in the next times. And so we need to challenge that and say, we're just leveling the playing field. It is not unfair to the other students if our students can respond in their native language, if our students could respond orally rather than written. right? If they get less number of problems, because it takes them a lot longer to translate everything that they're doing. That's just leveling the playing field. Is your question, does the student know the answer, or are you testing their language abilities? Because that's what I do. Or are you testing the content area? That's what it means to have culturally linguistically sustaining assessment, okay? And your job is the bottom, right? You're supposed to be ensuring that this is happening. You know, when I started in the field, I remember that special education teachers used to be in the basements and hidden away from everybody. Do you remember those times, anybody? Yeah. Now I feel like that's the ESL teacher, you know. You don't feel empowered to kind of be in the front of that meeting. I want you to change that. Only you could change it, because you're the one sitting in those meetings. I'm not sitting in those meetings. You have to speak up and advocate for the students. And you need to teach the teachers to speak up and advocate for those students, right? In pre-referral meetings and in special education evaluation meetings, sometimes we're still not inviting the ESL teacher. So I did a workshop that somebody here attended, and one of the districts said, well, I don't have enough ESL teachers to attend the special ed meetings. That is true. That is real, right? We need twice the number of ESL teachers, right? So how can you figure out that problem, right? So one suggestion is, can you have regular meetings of special education and ESL where you're reviewing students, kind of MTSS meeting, you're reviewing student data and preparing for those going through the pre-referral and special education referral process. So even if they cannot attend, there's a secure time where you're reviewing the students. Otherwise, what will continue to happen is we talk about the students, we call out the WIDA level, and then we continue to plan for special education services the way that we plan for every monolingual English-speaking student. It is not to be mean. It is not because people don't care about our kids. It's not because, you know, they just don't know, and that person that has that information and that expertise is not sitting in that room. And we didn't prepare them to sit in that meeting and say, this is what Claudia said, we cannot really deliver Wilson reading because, unless we do A, B, and C, because, I don't know, whatever it may be, right? Otherwise, what we're doing is we're sending the kids from Tier 1 curriculum in English, with maybe some supports, to the special ed curriculum in English, probably no supports, and then we wonder why they're failing. Well, our monolingual English speakers get one curriculum. Our students who are struggling are getting at least 2 or 3 curriculums, right? So yes, and I asked this question yesterday somewhere else I'm like, how many people here read 4 books at a time? Anybody? 4 books at a time? Oh God, there's 3 of you. You guys are amazing. Okay, how many people read 3 books at a time? Okay, another 4. So we're about 66 today, so minus 8. The majority of us can't do more than 1 book. Let's be honest. If I get to my book, I'm happy, right? You know, you might have an academic book and maybe like a novel, but it is hard to read them both, and we're asking the kids to do that every single day for 6.5 hours. Get the general curriculum books, then go to the special ed classroom, or go to Tier 2, get something else, then go to the special classroom and get something else, and it's not in their native language. That's hard. Think about it. Try 3 books for 2 weeks, and then send me an email and be like, I just about killed my husband or something. Okay. So this is a tool, the tool on the previous page, on the culture evaluating your curriculum. I don't know if you've done this. Some districts have done that. Have you done this? Sounds like a no. Okay. So in NYU, there is if you Google NYU Culture Responsive Scorecard, you will get this tool where you could actually take your curriculum and evaluate it for cultural responsiveness. Great conversation to have on a PD day. Hey, why don't we do this? Let's see what it tells us. Okay? It comes in elementary, middle, high school, content areas, science, social studies, reading, and math. So you could do it all. Okay? Oracy, here's your definition. So oracy is a more specific subset of skills and strategies within oral language that more closely relates to literacy objectives in academic settings. It's a really long sentence. It involves merging interpersonal and academic language to mediate learning and translanguaging. And it involves culturally relevant, explicit, universally designed attention and instruction in the language of the students so that they're able to comprehend. So you could read that later. But it's all about opportunity, okay? So I've talked a lot, right? So I want you to have about 2 minutes to talk to a person and say, what's one of those 7 ideas, or any idea, you could have others, that made you think about that you don't want to forget about today. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do that, okay? So what did you talk about? That works too.
No, just what really stood out and what we were talking about, right, like is twofold, that 20 to 25%. Like you're automatically thinking about, you know, how do we support teachers in that thinking?
In that thinking.
planning?
Beautiful.
And also us as a school leadership team thinking about, like Emily brought up, our staff meetings. Like
Yes. Who is your
our
25?
staff is reflective of the population of students we teach, right? So thinking about like a general staff meeting where we're just, you know, potentially not like doing the lecture, like thinking about there's 20 to 25% of
Yes.
teachers who are not receiving that information.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know,
Yeah.
that's what we were.
That's fantastic. I love that. That 20-25% will really change the way that we work. Okay?
We were talking about as a school leadership team to choose some students from different programs who are newly identified to like shadow them for a day. Whether that's really looking at their schedule or like literally like shadowing them just to see what their day looks like when they're in the tier 1 setting in the classroom, like what does that time look like? How many different teachers are they seeing throughout the day? How many locations are they going to? And just to see kind of how that might impact their progress for one way or another.
I love that. And this is the time to do it as you begin to prepare for next year's scheduling, right? Because that kind of begins around now, right? So that's great. One idea that I want to add to yours is when you're observing or shadowing the students, notice the level of non-academic feedback, non-academic versus academic feedback. So what research tells us is for kids that have challenges in classrooms, the teachers are more non-academic and negative in their interactions than academic and positive. We also tend to call the kids that know the answers by the fault of human nature. Okay? Notice I haven't picked any example of people who got it wrong, whatever I said, right? So when you're there, think about it. Another thing that you could look at is how long does it take your kid that you're shadowing to shut down? 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 20 minutes in each of those classes. And then what's different about the classes? Maybe small group, large group, interactive, passive learning. Get curious about that, okay? For ESL students, what we know that research tells us about general education is that the teachers will not even call on them positively or negatively. We leave them in the back by themselves. So how intentional can you get them to think about that? And maybe that's a way to identify the 20 to 25%, right? Because we could say, you know, are there any students, perhaps we could begin by thinking about which of the students we never call on, or where the students sit. Could that give us an idea of who's that 20 to 25%? Okay? And there was one more hand raised right here.
That I was thinking a lot about was intentionally connecting our ESL team and our reading support team. So is our reading teacher and our ESL teacher connecting? Does the reading teacher know the ESL goal, vice versa, and how are we supporting that? So it's
Fantastic. And the team back there said ESL and SPED. So that's great. Okay, and yours.
Yeah, I'm interested in the data, like,
Louder.
something I do sometimes is look at like the state identification rate of students with disabilities versus the school rate versus the rate of ELs in our school. I haven't thought about doing it by level, but I think like it's interesting to see that like at the highest level, 4 students are maybe being under-identified. From the pie chart we saw, though, we can't tell
We can't tell.
if that's over or under, so we have to compare that to. So
Good.
I'll go back and look by level how the identification rate compares to like the state.
Okay, what's your name? Tanya. So Tanya, everybody know Tanya? Everybody know her? If you don't know her, look at her face because I want to know her, right? She's the only one that is like, I want to delve deeper into that data. I need more answers, right? Love her. I'm taking her home with me.
No,
That's it.
not allowed.
No. There is always somebody who is the data person who like their brain thinks that way. What is, another addition I'm going to give you to that is what is the yield rate for those kids that are referred? The yield is if your child is referred, did they meet eligibility? Okay, so a lot of times, depending on the team, we may find there's a lot of referrals, but very little eligibility. Or you may find that all that are referred are found eligible. Either problem is bad, right? So you want to get to like a 70% rate is what the research tells us. That is about right, okay? And I also want you to think about when you're working with teachers who love to refer students, particularly our students, maybe you could have a conversation that it takes really somewhere between 10 to 20 hours of professionals collecting data, minimum, okay, between meetings, assessment, writing, blah, 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 right? I'm being conservative. That is taken away from intervention time or instruction time. Just saying. Okay, so in one school some years ago, they were referring, their rate was okay, they mirrored the state and their district, but they had an enormous amount of referrals. When we quantified more, how do we refer, it decreased the number of referrals, so that we implemented, at the time it was RTI, it decreased the number of referrals, and then we quantified the number of hours we returned to the classroom. And it was about 20 per kid. So even if you reduce your referral, let's say, or pre-referral by 10%, you have an enormous amount of intervention time that you could be adding for students. Like a whole new group gets an interventionist. So. Now, that's always remembering that if there's ever a suspicion that there is a disability, anyone could call that evaluation at any time, okay? What I'm saying is, how good are we at doing that? And where are we in the case of data? Okay, so I'm gonna skip that. So roadblock 2 is UDL. You've probably seen a figure similar to this one, yeah? Okay, this one I really like, because notice what happened in the last triangle. Right here. They took off the fence. So this one is my favorite. Everybody gets to play, right? Not always reality, but I really like that one. So the goal here is to think about what barriers could we remove in our current culture and sustaining practices among all those 6 areas that we reviewed that would help the students access the content, right? And we could do that by thinking about the 3 areas or principles of universal design for learning. The 3 principles are multiple measures of engagement, multiple measures of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And what's really cool about this tool, I did not make it, is by a guy called Zachary Smith. You could access through his little QR code up there. He explains it further in a video. But what he's done that I really love is that he's created, this flow chart of how to help a teacher to work through this. So I thought for coaches, this would be like fabulous, right? So it says, does the student care about what they're learning? Are they motivated? Begin there. That's step one. If the kid is not called on and is not motivated, he's not learning any language, period. So he's not accessing anything. He's not interested. So what can we do to engage the students in learning? Do the students are listening and are motivated, but they don't understand the concept because they may not have the vocabulary? Or is the student able to show their understanding in a way that is accessible to them? Can they say it in their native language? Can they share with the peer next to them in their native language? Can they audio record it rather than write it? Can they show it with a drawing? I don't know, whatever method you provide, okay? And then he goes on to have these tools. Again, I love these because it goes through a lot of questions that you could use in each of the 3 areas. So I'm not gonna go over that, and you probably can't read it. But I wanted you to see it because there's a wealth of information. So it talks about symptoms, like disengagement symptoms in this one, and then provides options under those points that UDL has. So it kind of gives you the cheat sheet, not having to come up with it for yourself or with a teacher, but you could get some of those going. Same thing for representation barriers. This one is probably more key to your work because you're trying to get the teachers to really think about how they teach so it is accessible to your students. And again, disengagement symptoms and then options for addressing it. And then action and expression, so same thing here, okay? It also helps when, so remember I told you about that faculty member who said, well, it's not fair to the other kids? Getting into that fight is a losing battle, right? Because it becomes like, well, that's what you think and that's what I think, so why is yours right or not or mine right? But if you could just show something like that that takes the conversation away and that just says, look, it's not me telling you that. It's not that I'm partial to the multilingual learners. It's that there is a framework to think about how to create more universally designed lessons, okay? And here's some ideas it gives it. Are there any of those that resonate with you? Think, you're consultants. Your work every day is being a consultant to those teachers. Beyond a coach, you're a consultant. What do consultants do? Try to get you to do things. That's what a coach does, right? Try to get you to do things. So you need all the tools in your back to kind of think about how to move them forward. Okay. Progress monitoring. Now we're moving, okay? So progress monitoring, our roadblock 3, really, let's just begin with how it should happen, because I just don't see it happening. It should happen in 5 cycles in 1 school year. Every 4 to 6 weeks, there's a cycle. So I gave you an article to read that I wrote, teacher-friendly. If you didn't get a chance to, you might want to look at it. But the idea is, how do we help them to create cycles of progress monitoring? Okay? So for the overall 70 to 75% of kids that are getting it, you do it 3 times a year. For the kids getting the tier 2 intervention or tier 3, then it's every 4 to 6 weeks. So you could help them create the list of students, kind of like we were talking about the ESL SPED meeting, and rotate through those students every 4 to 6 weeks. Find a protocol that works for you, create a protocol, and have a timekeeper, okay? The most significant students, the ones at the top 5% of tier 3 need, should go last. I hate saying that, but because what MTSS tells us is that the kids that are needing tier 2, it's just we haven't given them that extra dose that they needed, but you could pull them down, right? So I would say probably in Framingham, you're probably in the 60s. So how can you get to that 70, 75% of kids benefiting from tier 1? And then what we also know is those are shorter conversations, but the conversation for the kid that is significantly behind or having tremendous behavioral challenges, we could talk about him or her over 3 days. So they usually eat up your meeting time. So making sure that if you make a list ahead of time, how you're rotating the students in progress monitoring cycles, will help. Let's say ESL is also, the number of you is not enough. So with the classroom teachers, rotate the ESL students into 1 week so that you could be in multiple classes or multiple grades that you need to be, because in this class, in this grade, we'll do ESL students or dually identified students or level 3s only if you have a lot of them. You know, be intentional about how to group them so that you could be in multiple places at multiple times. Okay? Some good ideas there? Okay. If you don't really have those meetings right now, we need to schedule them for next year. Really push for that. That is a main aspect of the model. If you're not doing progress monitoring, you're really not doing MTSS. I will tell you that. You're not, because it's a prevention model. If we keep the intervention the whole year, it's not prevention, it's just an intervention. So it's not MTSS, okay? For multilingual students, the progress monitoring must also include English language development. And I'm gonna show you a couple ideas on how to do it, and then we can flush it out more over the next 2 sessions, okay? So it needs to occur we need to know how much they're growing. If you're in a dual language school, you're gonna have to do both languages, right? I mean, that's kind of obvious, I don't need to say that. Okay, and the end conversation for each of these students you review is you're either adding, changing, or decreasing the intervention in consultation with you or the ESL teacher. There has to be an outcome. This is not, we're gonna keep the intervention the whole year. It's either working but very slowly, so we wanna add to it. It's either working and the student is approaching tier 1 access, so we're gonna start decreasing it for the next 6 weeks until we could remove it. Or we need to change it altogether. It's really not causing any difference, so let's try something else. LLI is not working. Let's just do vocabulary development around the curriculum that the child is engaged in, literacy, social studies, and science. Well, something like that, okay? So those are, you should always have an outcome, okay? In addition to that, you should think about what other tools we could use for progress monitoring. So you have your universal screeners that you have in the district, so you always give that. But that one may need to give you some more information. So you could do diagnostic assessments that break a skill of reading down to its minor miniature parts, and observational or formative evaluations, okay? The formative evaluations are the way that you add an asset-based lens to this work, because in the other two, we're looking at what they are not able to do. What skills do they not have, right? What skill is missing? In the observational, what I'm proposing to you here is we could use the WIDA can-do descriptors as a way to monitor the gains in language development using an asset-based approach. Okay, so let's look at it. So here is just an example. This is just an example. This has to be developed in mind with the kids that you're thinking about and what makes sense in all the different grade levels, et cetera, et cetera. But you could grab the WIDA can-do indicators, either the originals or maybe it calls for the key uses one. Select probably 2 levels. In this case, I put 3 levels together. Identify which are those high leverage behaviors in that English language level that you want to see from them. That's why it has to be created by you, not by me, right? And then put the 5 cycles across or a monthly checklist. That's all I did here. I copied, pasted, and put monthly checks. You could put 5 cycles instead of monthly. It doesn't matter. Whatever you choose better is best. And then here's the kicker. Okay, this is nice, but you have to have 2 respondents minimum. The ESL teacher and the classroom teacher or the SPED teacher, and I would even say the student. You may have to rewrite those to make them more student-friendly, depending on the age. But why do you need multiple respondents? Okay, ESL teacher, if they're doing pull-out, you have smaller groups. Kids don't have an option not to talk, and they actually want to come out and talk with you because they know you value their language, right? Classroom teacher is doing whole class instruction. Less likely to see the behaviors. Less likely to see the behaviors. Claudia isn't really gaining any English. I think I need to refer her because I think this is a learning disability. Right? So if you have 2 respondents and you meet during an MTSS meeting, I could say, Claudia is reading common word families and simple sentences during my ESL lessons. And she's going to say, like, well, I don't really see that in class. How do you do it? Now there's a learning happening in the instruction. Now we're becoming more culturally and linguistically sustaining in our practice. You're delivering it to the gen ed teacher or the SPED teacher. Okay? And now you're talking about what the student can do. So how can I get him to do that in my class? Not focused on, Claudia is not learning to read, she's not picking vocabulary, this is not working, I don't know what to do in my class, I've tried everything. Have you heard those comments before? I've tried it all. And you're like, well, have you really tried it all? I mean, let's be real, right? Okay. Turn to the person next to you and tell them for about a minute, what do you think about this idea, or what stimulates in your thinking? Go ahead. Some really exciting conversations. Okay, I'm gonna ask 2 of your peers to share their thinking, okay? So I'm gonna ask these 2 ladies over here. What are your names? Vanessa and Courtney to share. You all know Vanessa and Courtney because you're gonna need them both. Okay.
So one of the things we were thinking about in terms of early literacy is Destin came out with new letters, and one of the letters is for targeting towards ESL L's, and it says monitor, and so this would be a nice pairing to say, like, this is how we're monitoring that instruction versus, like, kind of versus monitor, this is more concrete.
Okay, so concrete way to monitor, so that's great.
One of the things we were talking about is referral to some of our alternative programming in high school, like thinking about there, and oftentimes like how to determine what kind of support the students really need and what do we have available for them. And so a new process that we've implemented is this observation piece. And so this tool is just a really rich way to have that conversation and then be able to also engage with the family about the referral and where the student's at. So I'm just thinking about this tool and how it builds into some of our processes and procedures for support and referral to some of our other programming.
And the beauty of it is because it's an informal tool, an observational informal tool, you could use it every day. You could use it once a month. You could use it once every 4 or 6 weeks. You could have the paraprofessional do it. You could have the special ed team person who's going to come in and observe the student as part of their role of data collection. Use that. And if you have it over time, you could see, and everyone could see, the child's actually making gains, right? And it would help then, what we're going to do in the last session, which is to connect to the IEP, right? So let's say that the student is eligible for special education. Now we can use some of these connections in reading and writing in particular, but sometimes listening and speaking, depending on the area of disability, and use them to define or write your IEP goal in conjunction with the special education teacher. Does that make sense? It makes everybody's job easier. It does take time. What is it?
When you use the same tools to collect
Yes.
and assess them and have a
Yes.
real picture that can start even with the reader report, the access report, where they are and how they progress.
Yes.
And have also train and work with the SPED teachers to look through the same language lenses, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it helps with the gen ed teachers because they get an access score, like a 3.0, or, you know, the child has behavior disorders. And they're like, yeah, I know, but I don't really know, right? So, you know, or they tell you they have dyslexia, right? That's a common one now. You're like, okay. The regular teacher doesn't really ask, how is that shown in his everyday reading work? Or what do I need to do differently? They leave that to the SPED teacher. And this way, you can't actually leave it to anybody because if you look at these are things that teachers should be addressing anyway. It's just they haven't seen them in this structure, right? So that is one aspect. I have a lot of criticism about WIDA, but that is one aspect I really like, are the can-do descriptors. And I actually like the original ones. So that's just my take. But remember, I'm a special ed person more than an ESL person. So, I'm always going to go for things that are simpler, that I could break down into tasks, rather than the key uses, which are highly complicated to be understood. So that's more your expertise. But you could decide how to do that. You could have the tool for you that has more key uses, and then have the tool for the regular ed teacher that has less descriptive or less coordinated key uses. I don't know, whatever. You decide. So hopefully we get some time in the second or the last session to kind of create our own. So I want you to start thinking about that. That's our number 8, is start thinking about how you could use the can-do descriptors with the population of students that you have to maybe create something, okay? This tool you saw in the article that I wrote, this is just an example of how do we keep track. So another thing that would help with progress monitoring is if we had all the information in one place, okay? So if you look here, this tool, again, it's 2 pages because it's 5 cycles. So you would have 2 cycles right here, cycle 1, cycle 2, and then you would have 3 more boxes. So you don't want to create anything that's too long because people don't want to do it. So you're like, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not doing it. So, but the key aspect of here is, it reminds us what type of intervention they're getting, and if they're an English learner, you can change it, edit it however you want. It reminds you that you need a universal tool and a progress monitoring tool. So you have multiple points of data. Then it also reminds everybody to have the conversation about, is Tier 1 accessible? Because if we know from research that Tier 1 is where we're failing in this model the most, then having that conversation is really important. And then for the tiered intervention, it reminds us, does it have oracy? Or did we just sit them in front of the computer for Lexia? I love Lexia, by the way, I'm not, but you are sitting in front of the computer. So there's no oracy. So maybe the intervention is Lexia with another additional time of oracy, okay? And was it intended? What's intended was delivered. That's another one. Like we have a lot of great intentions, but then we don't deliver them for totally legitimate reasons. So in 6 weeks, if the intervention, which is what's recommended 3 times 20 minutes for Tier 2, is supposed to be 6 weeks, and it would be 18 sessions. But maybe this kid was out 1 week, and then you were out the next week because he got you sick, or she got you sick, and then the 3rd week there was an emergency in the building. Now he got half the intervention. So when making that decision of adding, changing, or increasing, or whatever, you want to keep that in mind, okay? So where does this live? I don't know. That's the hard part, is how do you keep it as a live document so everybody could access it and you could use it at any time? You guys are more creative than that than me. And then again, coming back to, is the progress monitoring data, what is it telling us, right? What does the data say about district-wide, school-wide, grade-wide, and my favorite, subgroups, right? What does it say about our MLs in each level? Is the intervention in level 1 helping for your ELD level 1s? Is the intervention in level 2? Because that will remind us the intervention has to be different for level 1s and level 3s and level 5s, right? So if we're looking at by subgroup, we could know what works and what doesn't work. We could plan for it more strategically, okay? And the MLs with disabilities, the dually identified. So grab the groups. My hypothesis, and what we've seen in some data in other school districts, is the dually identified have the worst responses to intervention. So can we plan differently for them? For example, just throwing out an idea. As we plan for the next school year, you know who are your dually identified students. Can they start with intervention on day one? Day one, the teacher comes in, they're meeting, can we start taking them out? Can they get an intensive influx week one, and then you taper it back to fit the schedule? I don't know, that could be an idea. We had a school that tried it one time, it was great. So the interventions started day one, they didn't start in October after the benchmarking period. We know who they are. You then could add some of the other students of the 20 to 25% that are not responding to that immediately and start collecting that data. Okay, roadblock 4. We don't assess our own MTSS models. We just don't do it. I have yet to have gone to a district that has actually used the DESI tool, which I don't like. So this is not a DESI tool. It's just when you create a tool like this, you have to have some psychometric aspects, psychometrician look at it. What do? They make sure that you're not asking 3 questions in one box, right? Because if you're asking 3 questions that you don't know what people are responding to. That's the only reason I don't like it. And it was actually longer than the one that I used, although I've only given you a sample today. So why is it important? Because in MTSS, we need to have all these 6 areas working together for the model to happen. There has to be leadership. It will never happen if the school leader doesn't understand it or is not on board for it. It just doesn't happen. Number 2 is building capacity. If they understand it, they could help you build the capacity, the infrastructure, the meeting times, the intervention times, the collaboration times, whatever it may be, the personnel, etc. Number 3 is communication and collaboration. So is that happening across everybody involved? And remember when I started the session at 8:35, I said, everybody is on a hands-on aspect in MTSS. Everyone, hands on deck. Hands on deck. You have to. Everybody in the building has to do something around MTSS. So if you have people who are not involved, make them do something around it, whatever you need. Okay? That means the coach, heck, it could even mean the cook, right? You need personnel, you need people. So this can only happen if we capitalize on our personnel. Database problem solving, 3-tier intervention, so that's just looking more at the specifics of the model, and data evaluation, okay? If you're curious about the tool that I like, the link is there. It's out of Florida, and Florida is by way not an example of anything you want to do. I live in Florida for another 2 months, so trust me on that. But this was done by a colleague at University of South Florida whose approach to MTSS comes from general education, and that's what I love about the work that he does. His name is George Bosch. And he has developed this over the last 24 years. So I used to use his initial version, and now he has this version, which I really like. And I think now he's retired, so who knows what's going to happen. So I've been changing it here and there and playing with it. More to accommodate, because, of course, the MLs and dually identified students are always the afterthought. So what I've done is I've kind of rewritten some of his cells, so not psychometrically checked. So, be aware of that. But I try to kind of think about it from the perspective of the population that we're working with, okay? Here is a way to think about it if you're not currently having success in how it's laid out on an all hands-on deck approach, and is that, you have to organize the whole school around teams. For the lower grades, the grade level teams seem to work better, and the upper grades content area teams seem to work better, So I just wanted to provide that. The key here is that there is representation in those teams from you and the SPED teacher. It's the ability to not only review students, but cross-train each other. We all seem to think that because we're teachers, we do the same thing. What you do is very unique to what the regular teachers do, to what the SPED teachers do. We can all learn from each other. Okay, I'm gonna skip this. There is another tool that is out by one of my colleagues out of Portland State, Julie, and Julie created an implementation rubric, particularly from the lens of multilingual learners. The link is there, you could look at it. I like the content, but I don't like the way it's laid out. It's really hard for me to understand, but the content is really good. The questions are really good. So I thought I would just share it, and when you're bored, working out at 3 in the morning, and you need something to put you to bed, take out the slides, click up a couple links, and then you'll be going back to bed and learn something in the process. Okay. And so we're gonna have you start to work on answering some of those to see how you're doing. So there's 19 pages of questions, so I picked some key ones that I think related to what we're talking about today. And Natalia sent you a link. I think I picked 7 questions, so we're not probably gonna get through 7 questions, but let's do, answer it at your leisure. So you could start it now, or you could call me and I could answer questions as you want for the last 5 minutes. Okay. So I hope that I brought you about at least 8 ideas, low-hanging fruit you could start thinking about. We will continue to develop more content in the next 2 sessions. If you want to provide me some feedback, my email is available through Natalia. And just thank you for your attention. 2 hours is actually a lot. I fought with Natalia to tell her less than that because sitting for 2 hours is a lot. So thank you for sitting for 2 hours. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for coming and listening to this lecture. And again, I hope you take some ideas back home that you could implement tomorrow in your classroom. And again, I will be here as needed for the next 3 sessions. Thank you.